Hello, my wonderful friends. Welcome back to our ProRevenge channel, where many of you come to hear stories about people getting what they deserve. In this episode, you're going to hear 5 tales. The first was emailed to me by a lovely subscriber, thank you very much, and is about how a neighborhood punk gets put in his place after terrorizing the original poster for the longest time. The second story is about the original poster getting framed by his manager, fired from work, and then deciding to come back for the manager's job. I hope you stay for these wonderful stories today and do hit that subscribe button for future stories. Let's dive in. This first story is titled, Revenge on My Neighborhood Terrorizer, He Wet Himself, and that's always good to know. This story took place in the early 90s. I'm an adult now, and looking back on this day, I still can't believe what went through our minds as kids. Kids can be cruel, I find, because they don't understand consequences and are just mean for fun. When I was about 10 years old, my friend Kyle and I were constantly terrorized by these older kids who lived in the same neighborhood. The leader of the bully pack was a boy named Jake. Jake thought it was the funniest thing in the world for him and his friends to always chase us down the alley, pull down our pants, throw dirt at us, or sometimes take our shoes and throw them into a stranger's backyard. It made for some awkward and embarrassing situations for us as kids, and we felt quite powerless against these older kids. When you're 10 years old, you don't quite have the strength that a 13-year-old has, so Jake was much stronger than us. But one day, Jake took it too far. Kyle, some other friends, and I were sitting on the monkey bars at the school playground about an hour after school. I can't remember exactly, but I recall school ending at 2:50 in the afternoon, and it was almost 4 o'clock. Jake and his friends came out of nowhere, scared the daylights out of us, and chased us, trying to do their usual antics. In the chase, I dropped my lunch bag, which Jake grabbed and rummaged through, ignoring my pleas to give it back. He found the special snacks I was saving from lunch to eat after school, a fruit roll-up and a chocolate milk, and he ate them. I rarely got those because growing up we were always tight on money, and my family could not afford to buy snacks for me all the time. On rare occasions we did find some extra money, and I would get some sugary snacks as a treat. Little did I know this after-school bullying would become a regular occurrence. All the time after school the bullying amplified. Jake would find Kyle and me walking home, and he and his buddies would push us around and beat us up. One day I had enough and tried hitting back, but I was left with a bloody nose as Jake literally grabbed me by the shirt collar and threw me into a garbage can in the back alley. I was furious. Why didn't I tell a teacher or a parent? Honestly, I'm not sure. It would always happen after school, and Jake didn't go to the same school as us, so I didn't think anything could be done. I couldn't avoid this kid either. I tried to take a detour home or hide in the classroom until I thought the coast was clear, but somehow he would always find me. It was like Jake had some superpower smell and could sniff us out. It was the worst. Eventually, I had enough of it and decided that I needed to fight back. I was not letting this boy pick on me any longer. I had to be careful because Jake was much bigger than me and could physically overpower me. Over the next few weeks, Kyle and I formulated a revenge plan. One Friday after school, I knew Jake would purposely try to find me as I was walking home with Kyle. He'd always try to give us one last beating before the weekend. This time we were prepared to get revenge, we just needed to get him to a specific street. Our neighborhood was old. A lot of the houses were probably 80 years old or more, and therefore some had been abandoned and boarded up. There were usually squatters who had ripped off the boarded windows and left the house open for kids to play in. It's super sketchy to think about now that I'm an adult. There was one particular house that Kyle and I played in quite often. Lo and behold, on my walk home, Jake found us. He pushed Kyle to the ground, then pulled my backpack off me and started to go through my bag again, looking for snacks and goodies. When he found my mom's homemade brownies, which I purposely left in the backpack, he started going to town on them while starting to walk away. That's when I said loudly and sarcastically, "I hope that brownie tasted real good, Jake." I had caught his attention, and he stared at me while I finished and said, "Because I made sure to add a special ingredient to that just for you." "What special ingredient?" he asked. I replied, "Oh, some dog mess." I barely had enough time to finish my sentence before this hulk of a boy started sprinting at us, ready to beat the daylights out of me. Kyle and I booked it as fast as we could, making sure to go toward the abandoned house and not too far away. For the record, no, I did not put dog mess in the brownie. I thought about it because the brownie was plant-based and tasted off to me. I thought it was enough to make him doubt the special ingredient. So here we were, running for our lives with Jake on our heels. When we got to the yard of the abandoned house, there was a big open basement window in the back. The glass was gone, thankfully. When we rounded the corner, Kyle ducked fast and clambered in. I was right behind him and slid through the window like I was stealing third base or something. Jake was extremely close behind, and when we heard him shout, "Get back here!" Kyle and I shuffled through the dark of the basement and hid in our spots. I watched through a hole in the wall as Jake struggled to get through the open window and dropped down into our trap. When Kyle and I went through the window, we were careful to land on a skinny ledge and shuffle to the side to hide. With the way Jake came in, he stepped right into the kiddie pool we left there, which was full of muddy water mixed with our urine and feces. Yep, we were gross boys, and for the past week, we had been coming here after school to relieve ourselves into the kiddie pool. Looking back as an adult, what the heck were we thinking? Jake yelled something as soon as he felt his feet soaked, and the smell of the urine and fecal matter hit him hard. He screamed, "Are you serious? I'm gonna kill you!" He stepped out of the kiddie pool and started stalking the basement, his feet making squishy noises with every step, demanding we come out. We stayed hidden and silent. Kyle and I knew the house very well, but Jake didn't. Whichever direction Jake went, we went the opposite. Then, in his search, Jake walked into one of the rooms in the basement, and we slammed the door behind him, locking him in. This was a dark room with a boarded window that didn't allow a lot of light in, so it made for a pretty freaky setting. Jake started pounding on the wall and screaming at us to let him out. Remember, this is an abandoned house that had squatters in it from time to time. The basement was pretty filthy. There were some dirty old mattresses, newspapers, broken glass, and other junk littered everywhere. But that also meant that people dumped random stuff on the property, like old Halloween decorations. We had placed one of the zombie bodies in the corners. It was motion activated but broken. Instead of making a low, growling, moaning sound, the zombie made a high-pitched screeching noise because the voice box was broken, I guess. While Jake was banging on the door, the prop caught motion and came to life with glowing red eyes. It let out a death screech and jerked around violently. This scared the bejesus out of Jake. His cries quickly turned from anger to fear, and I heard him yelp in terror, which only made him become more desperate for us to let him out. But I wasn't done. I had climbed up onto some old furniture to a little gap in the ceiling that connected to the room, situated right above the door. We timed it so that the moment the zombie stopped moving, I dropped a whole skeleton prop on him. As soon as Jake felt the bones drop on him, he screamed at the top of his lungs into a vent that amplified his voice tenfold. Jake screamed like a kid in a nightmare, "Let me out!" Just like clockwork, the zombie thing caught movement again and started its devilish death cry and convulsed in the corner, freaking out Jake some more. As he was panicking, Kyle and I unlocked the door and stealthily made our exit out the window to the outside. As much as I'd like for Jake to have stayed there, I knew we couldn't leave him forever. With the way the house was boarded up, Jake only had one exit, which was the window, and we waited right outside of it. After a few moments, Jake emerged out of the house, disheveled and defeated, looking like a bag of beaten potatoes. He was covered in dust, his ankles were dripping in disgusting pea water, and his shoes were wet and caked in poop. To my glee, his crotch area was soaked. As he was wearing light brown jeans, the bugger had wet himself in fear. I made sure he saw me when he came out, and as soon as he made eye contact with me, I took my dad's Polaroid camera and snapped a photo of him. I said to him, "Don't ever steal my snacks or mess with me ever again," and I laughed. Very quickly from then on, Jake never bothered Kyle or me again. Jake also never made eye contact with me for years after that. I'm not sure if it was from fear or embarrassment. To this day, Kyle is still one of my closest friends. Kyle's older sister went to school with Jake and said he did a complete 180 after that little incident. Jake grew up to be a pretty decent guy, and through mutual Facebook friends, I've creeped his profile and found out that he works as a nurse in a children's hospital. I kept the photo in a memory box under my bed. My initial intention was to show everyone how he wet himself, but eventually, I just kept it as a souvenir of my most brilliant revenge. I wish I could have shown you this photo, but my mom ended up cleaning my room when I was a teenager, and she threw everything out she could get her hands on, including that wonderful photo and my first adult magazine. That was a great revenge, and thanks for emailing me this lovely story, Jesse. Planning the revenge in an abandoned building was a super sketchy thing to do, especially for a 10-year-old. I'm glad you guys didn't run into a group of dangerous squatters in there, because that would have been horrendous and could have possibly been a nightmare for all of you. This next story is titled, "Senior Manager Gets Me Fired. I turn things around and get her job and her salary, plus see her break down, and then let her know exactly how I got my revenge." I was hired by a company as an assistant manager, a job I was well qualified for. The owner is rarely on site as he owns several businesses. The company is run by a general manager who hired me but who works mostly second shift, and therefore I have little daily contact with since I was hired for first shift. I was assigned to Eva for training. Eva was a manager and had been with the company for 5 years. I trained with her for a few days and then was on my own. We were friendly but not close. After a few months I was doing well at my job and had even gotten some new procedures adopted to help boost sales. Eva began to act resentful. She would correct me for small things and took any opportunity to remind me that she had trained me. It didn't matter to me, she wasn't my boss. I reported to the general manager, so I mostly just ignored her. What I didn't know was that Eva was not just tight with the general manager, but they had worked together at another place for 10 years before this one. One day, at shift end, the general manager had to talk. She told me it wasn't working out, saying I was still making mistakes at 6 months that I shouldn't be. I asked for examples. A few of them were petty matters that Eva had mentioned, but most of them were just not true. I tried to argue, but it was clear that I was set up and framed. I decided to reach out to the owner since I had nothing to lose. He was sympathetic but said he relies on the general manager to run the business and had to support her decision. Then he mentioned that if things hadn't been so bad between me and Eva, it probably could have been worked out. That's when I knew she was behind me being fired from a job that I needed, really liked, and was making great money at, and I vowed to get revenge. I started searching her online info. In less than an hour, I had uncovered gold, thanks to one of those paid services. About 3 months prior, Eva was arrested and charged with a DUI in a neighboring state. The court record showed that she had a hearing coming up in a few weeks, and that was enough to get her fired. It affects a professional license that she and I had to have as management. Per state law, license holders must report criminal charges to the licensing board, and in the case of a DUI arrest, licenses are typically suspended pending trial. I called the owner and told him what I discovered. It was great news to him, I guess, since it was out of state. Eva was keeping it a secret. Maybe she was hoping to get let off the charges. The next day, the owner called and said Eva was fired. He thanked me for telling him about her DUI, apologized for how I was fired, and offered me Eva's position and salary. He asked me to come in the next morning to meet with him and to cover Eva's shift, and I accepted. That alone was sweetly satisfying revenge, but what happened next was the icing on the cake. I got to work extra early, met with the owner and general manager, and we all agreed to start fresh. Cool. It was still an hour before opening, and I was in the back of the place when I heard the door chime. When I came out a few minutes later, Eva was there, tears flowing, begging the owner for her job back. She obviously didn't know I was there because when she saw me, her whole body seized, and her shocked expression was priceless. I walked right by her, staring her down with a grin. Eva came out a minute later and wouldn't make eye contact. As she walked away, I said, "Good luck on the 23rd. That was her court date. If the general manager and Eva had a 10-year-long relationship and were buddy-buddy, I'd say the original poster should watch his back. It's time to find some dirt on the general manager, assume that role and salary as well, my friend." This next story is titled, "Trick Me Out of My Laptop? You'll Give Me Your Car." 13 years ago, I was in my late teens, living on my own and really struggling financially. One of the few possessions I had was an old laptop. My laptop had stopped working properly, and while I'm fairly proficient in using a computer, I had no idea about fixing them. I did a bit of searching on the internet but couldn't get it working, so I asked my stepdad to take a look. He has a quick look and says it's toast, but he'll take it off my hands if I don't want it. So I said, sure, if it's broken, it's no good to me. 10 minutes later, I walk into the room and he's using it. I asked if he fixed it and he says, yeah, thanks for the laptop. I was obviously upset. My mom said she wasn't getting involved, and his only response was that he did a quick internet search to find the fix and that I could have done the same. I was broke, and he took one of my only possessions, even though he already had a PC and a laptop of his own. A few months later, I was visiting my mom and stepdad when I had an idea. While I'm useless with computers, I'm very experienced with mechanics, specifically Audis, and my stepdad had a 2001 Audi A3. Before coming into the house, I went under his car and unplugged the oil level sensor and the vacuum line for the turbo. Later that day, he went to go to the shop or something. When he started the car, it threw up oil warning lights on the dash and wouldn't boost, so he turned it off with a look of concern on his face. I went out to ask him what's up, and he said something had gone majorly wrong. He mentioned something along the lines of catastrophic turbo failure or engine failure. He'd already spent quite a bit on repairs and didn't want to spend any more money on it, so he spoke to my mom about cutting their losses and scrapping it. I asked how much it was worth at the scrapyard and he said $100. So, I graciously offered $120 to take it off his hands to maybe part it out, which he accepted. He signed over the title, wrote me a receipt of purchase, and handed over the keys. I walked outside, lifted the hood, pretended to look at my phone for a minute, then went under the car and plugged the vacuum line and the oil sensor back in. I fired it up and drove it around the block. When I got back, I gave him a thumbs up and said, "It's all fine now." His mouth was wide open, and he was extremely upset. My reply was, "You could have found the solution with a quick internet search." He tried arguing that it wasn't fair and that if it was working, I couldn't just take his car. I said he didn't have a problem tricking me out of my laptop and that he'd already signed the car over to me, so tough luck. My mom kind of laughed and said she's not getting involved and that it was his own fault. I still have the car to this day, and it's practically in showroom condition and runs really well. Oh my goodness, what a great revenge. The original poster also shared a picture of his shiny new car. For everyone out there who knows anything about cars, I have a question. Can you really go underneath someone's car and unplug the oil level sensor? It seems like that's something they'd have hidden under the hood to prevent strangers from tampering. I have no clue about this, so I'd really love to know if this was possible on a 2003 Audi A3. Please leave your comments below. This next story is titled, "Don't Fire the Guy Who Holds the Patents." For some context, my father had a degree in mechanical engineering, either a master's or a doctorate. It had taken him years to earn, and he was very proud of it. Thanks to his training, he worked for many well-known companies, primarily with procedures used to make various things. Over time, he privately began working on an idea that would revolutionize how school and gym lockers worked. My father realized there was a problem with the regular type of metal lockers. It was very easy for someone to break into them. What's more, as the lockers were designed, there were multiple exposed moving parts, which meant that if a student put too many books in one or anything got against the door, the locker could jam shut, making it nearly impossible to open. So, for several years, Dad toyed with several ideas before hitting on a new design that would solve all these problems. The inner workings of the locker's locking mechanism would be contained within the door in such a way that 1. It was impossible for someone to shim or break into. 2. The entire mechanism would be enclosed. And 3. It was relatively maintenance-free. At this point, my father was the vice president of manufacturing, and apparently there wasn't a clause in his contract that required him to turn over designs he created while working for the company. Dad still approached the company, offering them the design, but they weren't interested. He sat on the design for a while before eventually taking out several patents on it and then forgetting about them. About 6 months after his first attempt to get the company interested, the parent company's owner and chairman of the board passed away, and the board opted to sell off some of the holdings. The company my dad worked for was part of that. The new owners were young guys who thought they knew everything and set about changing 99% of how things were done. At some point, they stumbled across the plans my father designed. They really wanted to start producing this new design, but as they didn't have all the plans and processes laid out, they had to turn to my father for answers. Rather than asking him how to do it or licensing the patents, they ordered him to turn over all his work or they would fire him. Dad stood his ground and refused. The new owners and my father went back and forth, arguing over details for several weeks before they finally fired him for insubordination. Now on to the revenge. After cleaning out his office and packing things into the trunk of his car, my father headed home and made a few phone calls. He must have gone through 8 or 9 different calls before he got in touch with someone interested in what he had to say. See, my dad was under no illusions that the company that fired him wouldn't try to make those patented lockers on their own. He also knew that, though the company was relatively small, the owners had money, and there was no way he could fight them. However, a large company could. So, he contacted the major competitors and made them an offer. He eventually set up a meeting with some people, wheeled out the prototype he made, explained how everything worked, and noted that with the system, the company could revolutionize the way lockers were designed, improving both safety and security. What's more, as he was the only patent holder for the next 7 years or so, the company could be the only one to produce them. The competitor jumped at the chance and bought all the patents for both the design and the process. They even paid my dad a substantial consultancy fee to go to their manufacturing site and teach their crews how to make everything needed to produce them. Less than 6 months after the first company fired him, their number one competitor was completely dominating the market with this new design, and there wasn't a thing the first company could do about it. They tried suing my father, claiming he'd stolen their intellectual property, But that case quickly fell apart when they had to admit under oath that they never signed a contract with him. In the 7 years after the second company bought the locker design and process patents, they moved into markets they previously couldn't access. The first company kept going, but by the time the patent expired, they were a shadow of their former selves. The new owners sold the company at a loss, with the competitor buying it only to shut that production facility down due to redundancy. It may have put 200 people out of work, though. Given how much business they'd lost, I'd wager it was far less than that. This last story is titled, Best College Speaker Ever. When finishing my degree in criminal justice, we had to learn about how the justice system works, and how sometimes it doesn't. For about 2 weeks we studied a case from the early 1990s about a woman who killed her husband. Since the case is public record and a very interesting read, you should look up Betty Friedberg, 1993. The setting was small-town Iowa, and the husband was the town drunk. Everyone knew him as a drunk, a brawler, a womanizer, and an overall bad person. His wife was a stay-at-home mom, as she wasn't allowed to work or leave the house aside from getting groceries. He would go home, beat her, and assault her, and the cycle would go on and on. The whole town knew. Neighbors, a quarter-mile down the road, would still call the police when they heard noises. It was well documented, but because he was never a threat to their daughter, the police did nothing aside from taking him to jail like a revolving door. Each time he got out, he'd beat her up again. Their daughter was away at college but came home for Thanksgiving. While the father was at work, the daughter told her mother that the father had assaulted her, and that she had even had an abortion because of it. This was the breaking point for the mother. She got her revenge 100-fold. When the daughter went back to school after the holidays, the husband came home, and she used his own gun, which was on the kitchen table, and shot him dead. The table is important because it was a big farm table used for chopping deer and other livestock. Butchering was her job, and she was good at it. If I could find the case report, it has pictures of the table and the clear marks of chopping. She chopped up her husband, scattered his body over neighboring farms, fed what she could to her livestock, and cleaned up. Months went by, and winter came and left. The police investigating his disappearance even questioned her while sitting at the table, drinking coffee. She explained the marks on the table by saying she butchered her own meat and showed the officers her deep freeze. The investigation went on for months until a neighbor's dog brought back a body part. They identified it as belonging to him, and she was arrested on the spot. She pled not guilty and refused any offers. It went to trial, and 12 of her peers judged her not guilty due to extenuating circumstances. She confessed to the crime, explained why she did it and how, and said she had no real choice because no one was going to help her. She was let go entirely for the murder charge. The next week we had Betty as a speaker in our class to discuss the case, and she was awesome. At the time, she ironically sold dismemberment insurance for Aflac. Betty, if you ever read this, know that you're seen as a figurehead for battered women, and you pulled off the most incredible revenge I've ever studied. I had no idea that dismemberment insurance is actually a thing. I'm not going to say I'm happy with what Betty did because I don't want to condone murdering someone, but I'm smiling at the thought of her revenge on that terrible person. Mama Bear for the win, don't mess with her kin. I didn't intend to rhyme that, I promise. And here's how I see the story. Story 1, Revenge on my neighborhood terrorizer. Jake was a menace, and I can still feel the sting of his bullying. Stealing my precious snacks was the last straw. As a kid, I was powerless, but outsmarting him with that kiddie pool trap was pure genius. The mix of urine, feces, and a screeching zombie prop? Disgustingly brilliant. Seeing Jake wet himself in terror was the ultimate payoff, and snapping that Polaroid sealed the deal. I regret losing that photo, but the memory of his humiliation lives on. Jake's transformation into a decent nurse is surprising, but I'm proud my revenge taught him a lesson. Kids can be cruel, but this showed me even a 10-year-old can fight back creatively. Story 2. Senior manager gets me fired. Eva's betrayal, framing me to get me fired, hit hard. I loved that job. Uncovering her DUI secret was a game changer, and I relished getting her job and salary. Her tearful breakdown when she saw me at work was the sweetest revenge. Throwing her court date in her face as she left? Priceless. I've dealt with jealous coworkers, and exposing their flaws feels so good. The general manager's loyalty to Eva is a red flag, though. I'd keep digging for dirt on them, too. This taught me to always check public records when someone crosses me. Revenge doesn't get much sweeter than taking their spot. Story 3. Trick me out of my laptop? My stepdad's smugness, tricking me out of my laptop, still burns. Turning the tables by fixing his Audi A3 with a simple plug-in was poetic justice. Driving off with his car after he signed it over for $120? Glorious. His shocked expression and my internet search quip mirrored his own arrogance perfectly. I've been in tight spots financially, and his betrayal stung, but this revenge was empowering. I'm no car expert, but unplugging sensors under the hood is plausible for a 2001 Audi A3. Clever move. Keeping that car in showroom condition feels like a trophy of my triumph. Story 4. Don't fire the guy who holds the patents. My dad's strategic revenge on that arrogant company is legendary. Their mistake, firing him over his patented locker design, was their downfall. Selling the patents to a competitor and helping them dominate the market was a masterstroke. I admire his foresight, securing those patents independently, and his calm execution. The competitor's success and the original company's collapse prove karma works. I've seen companies undervalue talent, and this resonates. Never underestimate the guy with the intellectual property. Dad's consultancy fee and their failed lawsuit? Chef's kiss. This story inspires me to protect my own work fiercely. Story 5. Best college speaker ever. Betty Friedberg's story is chilling yet inspiring. Her husband's abuse was horrific, and learning he assaulted their daughter pushed her to the edge. Chopping him up and scattering the remains was extreme, but I can't help but admire her resolve. The not guilty verdict feels like justice for a battered woman trapped in a broken system. Hearing her speak in class, now selling dismemberment insurance, is darkly ironic and empowering. I've studied cases where victims take drastic measures, and Betty's story stands out. She's a symbol of survival, and her revenge, while grim, shows the strength of a mama bear protecting her kin. And that wraps up another episode of our ProRevenge channel. If you guys enjoyed that story, hit the thumbs up. If you aren't subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future revenge stories. And I'll see you guys in the next one.